This story is about a mother-in-law who treated her uncle and aunt well and took the author's couple for granted, but was abandoned by her eldest son and tried to rely on the writer's couple, so they cut her off with harsh words. Should we feel pity for such a mother-in-law? Let's take a look together. Please subscribe and like our channel.
Hello? I'm a woman in my early 40s. My husband and I have a bit of an age gap and we both work. We have 2 children. We've been married for 15 years now. I got married at a young age, and it was quite challenging due to my mother-in-law. She divorced my father-in-law and raised 2 sons while running a restaurant. I acknowledge that she raised 2 sons and managed the household all by herself. When I first visited my husband's house before marriage, I thought of my mother-in-law as someone who treats her daughter-in-law well. The first time I visited, my father-in-law and brother-in-law were also there. And after we had a meal, my mother-in-law did the dishes. At that time, I heard that my father-in-law and his wife had been married for a long time. A mother-in-law who doesn't make her daughter-in-law do the dishes after a meal and does it herself. From the perspective of a prospective daughter-in-law, it would have looked good. As time passed and I became a mother myself, I realized that it was not so common for my mother-in-law to do the dishes instead of my brother-in-law the day I first visited. My mother-in-law never spoke ill of my brother-in-law. She only spoke ill of me. My brother-in-law was a daughter-in-law who was cherished like a daughter by my mother-in-law, while I was treated like a picked-up daughter. But now my mother-in-law wants to rely on me. Since I've already been hurt as much as I can be, no matter how well my mother-in-law pretends to treat me, it only looks like hypocrisy. I don't empathize with my mother-in-law at all and only see her negatively. From a third party's perspective, my mother-in-law may seem pitiful. There may be people who would curse me as a bad daughter-in-law, but I'm convinced that my mother-in-law's recent good treatment of me is nothing more than a hypocritical act for her own benefit. I have no desire to get along with my mother-in-law, and my husband feels the same. I had my first child 2 years after marriage. My father-in-law only had 2 daughters, so my mother-in-law pressed me a lot to have a son. She even said to try not being able to have a son. From the outset of marriage, I was treated like a maid at my husband's house. My brother-in-law was treated like a princess. The reason why my mother-in-law cherished my brother-in-law so much was that he was a legal professional. They said I shouldn't make my brother-in-law, a legal professional, do such trivial things. Then what about me? I'm working just like my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law's job is an employee at a law firm. I know he graduated from law school, but after several attempts at the law firm exam, he gave up and got a job at a law firm. I work at a medium-sized company. In terms of salary, I wouldn't be less than my brother-in-law. But my mother-in-law says my brother-in-law is a legal professional. Anyone who hears that would think my brother-in-law is a judge or lawyer. My brother-in-law is a precious daughter-in-law because he is a legal professional. And I am a daughter-in-law who works at a general company. So I have to do all the trivial things. I guess I got married at a young age. After we gathered at my husband's house and had a meal, I did all the washing up and cleaning, thinking of my mother-in-law who had worked hard all these years. My husband did to some extent, but my mother-in-law didn't like that. My husband was doing such things with me. She wanted me to do everything by myself. When the restaurant my mother-in-law runs was busy on weekends, I went to help. I once asked my mother-in-law out of curiosity. When I asked why my brother-in-law doesn't do any of this, she said it was because he does important work as a legal professional. I had nothing to say when she said that working at a law firm is being a legal professional and doing important work. My mother-in-law was careful about what she said to my brother-in-law. She spoke whatever came to her mind to me. At first, I thought I had to endure her harsh words because she was an adult. And I thought if I did well, my mother-in-law would change too. Gradually, she began to vent her daily stress on me, and when I had my second child, she said, "Don't go around bragging that you had a son." After hearing this, I gradually closed my heart to her. I had my second child when my first child was in second grade in elementary school. Due to economic circumstances, my husband and I planned to have only one child. My first child really wanted a younger sibling, and I really wanted a second child too. My mother-in-law strongly urged me to have a second child, but I didn't have a second child because of her. Anyway, my husband's work went well, and we became financially comfortable. And he also wanted a second child. He even suggested that I quit my job to have a second child. However, even after having a second child, I continued to work at the company I had been working at. I didn't want to give up my accumulated career. And I wanted to continue working at the company because the atmosphere was good. My mother-in-law, who had been urging me to have a son as soon as I got married, didn't look very happy when I told her that my first child was a boy. I thought she would be very happy when I had my first child. But she didn't even congratulate me or thank me for my hard work. It seemed like she was considerate of my brother-in-law, who only has 2 daughters. When I had my second child, she came to the hospital and told me not to brag about having a son. She said that my uncle and aunt, who only have 2 daughters, would feel bad that I had another son. I felt bad that my mother-in-law looked down on me. But I also felt upset many times because of my brother-in-law, who would say things to make me feel bad for no reason. When we gathered at my husband's house, my brother-in-law never did the dishes, as if he thought it was natural for me to do them. Even when my uncle's family went to my husband's house when we were not there, my brother-in-law never did the dishes. I felt a sense of dissonance at my brother-in-law's words. Why should I do that? On holidays, when I went to my husband's house and was cooking for a long time, my brother-in-law would come in when it was time to serve, do a little work, and then go out to the living room to play. My mother-in-law didn't work much either, and my husband and I did all the work. I guess my mother-in-law wanted me to do all the food preparations by myself. She kept calling my husband and trying to sit him down on the living room sofa. When I was pregnant with my first child, I had severe morning sickness, and when it got a little better, there was a Thanksgiving Day. Even then, my mother-in-law wanted me to do all the work by myself. When my husband and I were cooking, my mother-in-law came in with a frown and gave us some instructions and left. But she looked very happy when she was with my brother-in-law in the living room. I wonder why my mother-in-law liked my brother-in-law so much. I have cooked and served food for my mother-in-law's birthday twice. It was before I got pregnant with my first child. My mother-in-law only gave a cold evaluation of the food I had prepared. And she didn't say thank you or that I had worked hard. So from then on, I didn't prepare a birthday table for my mother-in-law. Then she asked me why I didn't do it. I was speechless and couldn't answer. I was speechless and couldn't speak, but my mother-in-law said that it was natural for a daughter-in-law to prepare a birthday table for her mother-in-law. I thought to myself, am I the only daughter-in-law? And I missed the timing to reply. And I still regret not being able to say anything. My husband was also very upset seeing me struggling so much. Then, when my mother-in-law came when I had my second child, and told me not to brag about having a son, my husband was very angry. When I was in the postnatal care center, my husband went to eat at my mother-in-law's restaurant and had a big fight with her. My husband told my mother-in-law, "Why do you make my wife do everything you want, and not make my sister-in-law do anything? And why do you treat my sister-in-law so well, and only say mean things to my wife?" "I'm sorry" to my wife, "and I can't see you anymore." After that, we hardly ever went to my husband's house. For several years, we only went to my husband's house once in a while on holidays. I'm not sure, but my mother-in-law must have done all the food preparations for the holidays. My brother-in-law is the type who likes to show off, because he is the eldest son. So he wouldn't have skipped the holidays or ancestral rites. My brother-in-law is a person who doesn't do anything at his in-laws' house. So even if I'm not there, he wouldn't have done anything, so my mother-in-law must have done everything. Then last year, my father-in-law apparently forgot my mother-in-law's birthday. My mother-in-law mentioned that she was upset that my uncle and aunt had just passed by her birthday when they came over. My brother-in-law got angry at my mother-in-law, saying that it's understandable if they were busy, and they have other children besides us. Why are you behaving like this? After that, my uncle also rarely went to his in-laws' house. After giving birth to my second child, I was just occasionally on the phone with my mother-in-law. My husband said if I didn't want to, I didn't have to. If there's something to say to my mother-in-law, he asked me to tell him. After keeping a distance from my mother-in-law like this, I went to my in-laws' house not long ago. My mother-in-law said that working was too hard, and that she would soon hand over the store to someone else. My mother-in-law had been having back problems for a while, and her back pain has recently worsened to the point where she can't work. My mother-in-law said this, and I must have had an overreaction without realizing it. I told her there was no need to tell us such things. My husband is a child picked up by my mother-in-law, and I'm just a daughter-in-law living with a picked-up child. So if you want to say such things, say it to my uncle and brother-in-law, he said. My brother-in-law, who has received great love from my mother-in-law, to the point of never doing the dishes when he comes to his in-laws' house, will surely do well to my mother-in-law, I said. Although my mother-in-law is still young and doesn't need to worry much, I also mentioned that as she gets older, her eldest son will take care of everything. I've heard a lot of harsh words from my mother-in-law, and my feelings were hurt. But I was even more hurt due to discrimination. So I have no intention of paying attention to my mother-in-law, I said. My uncle is a child who has monopolized love from my mother-in-law. So you should rely on my uncle. And as my uncle is the eldest son who used to put strength on his shoulders, he will play his role as an eldest son well, I said again. Since then, I haven't even occasionally called my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law hasn't called me either. My husband occasionally talks to my mother-in-law, but he only briefly deals with the matter and hangs up the phone. My husband is a person who particularly loves children, but he says he cannot forget what my mother-in-law said when she came to the hospital when my second child was born. I don't know what will happen in the future, but there will never be a situation where I live with my mother-in-law. I think I can't help it even if other people criticize me. I write this post to reaffirm my determination once again.
My mother-in-law said that working was too hard and that she would soon hand over the store to someone else. My mother-in-law had been having back problems for a while, and her back pain has recently worsened to the point where she can't work. My mother-in-law said this, and I must have had an overreaction without realizing it. I told her there was no need to tell us such things. My husband is a child picked up by my mother-in-law, and I'm just a daughter-in-law living with a picked-up child, so if you want to say such things, say it to my uncle and brother-in-law, he said. My brother-in-law, who has received great love from my mother-in-law to the point of never doing the dishes when he comes to his in-laws' house, will surely do well to my mother-in-law, I said. Although my mother-in-law is still young and doesn't need to worry much, I also mentioned that as she gets older, her eldest son will take care of everything. I've heard a lot of harsh words from my mother-in-law and my feelings were hurt, but I was even more hurt due to discrimination. So I have no intention of paying attention to my mother-in-law, I said. My uncle is a child who has monopolized love from my mother-in-law. So you should rely on my uncle, and as my uncle is the eldest son who used to put strength on his shoulders, he will play his role as an eldest son well, I said again. Since then, I haven't even occasionally called my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law hasn't called me either. My husband occasionally talks to my mother-in-law, but he only briefly deals with the matter and hangs up the phone. My husband is a person who particularly loves children. But he says he cannot forget what my mother-in-law said when she came to the hospital when my second child was born. I don't know what will happen in the future, but there will never be a situation where I live with my mother-in-law. I think I can't help it even if other people criticize me. I write this post to reaffirm my determination once again. Why do parents discriminate between their children, piercing their hearts with a dagger? What could possibly be the reason for parents to treat ill-tempered children well and take the good ones for granted? Having lived with such discrimination and contempt, would the author want to do something for her mother-in-law?